everybody, I'm Zenith Variant, GAY25. All of my friends call me Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and welcome to the Midnight Combo Pack, where I discuss 2 games I've completed recently in my backlog. You see, my gaming backlog is simply huge, and every so often, I take the time to go back and complete some games I've been putting off for a while. I often stay up all night just to get this done, sometimes even falling asleep while trying to get some of the tougher trophies. Because of this, most of my gaming is done after midnight, much like a late night double feature showcased by Clive Sinclair over on Likara's channel. Now, I don't review horror movies outside of Halloween, and most of my companions don't have opposable thumbs to play video games with me, so there won't be any guest hosts for this show, but I just figured, why not have a late night double feature of my own? Let's discuss the games I played long into the night as we make our way through the Midnight Combo Pack. Today we're starting off rather simple, with 2 games I've been a fan of for a long time, but never fully completed until just recently. If you're a fan of Valve, I'm sure you're well aware they have difficulty counting up to 3. Most of their franchises either end with the second game, or have DLC episodes that also stop at the number 2. I don't know why they keep avoiding creating a 3rd game to their series, however, I figured this was a perfect opportunity to showcase one of their series on my show. Today we're going to delve into a duology of puzzle platformers that I find simply addictive and incredibly fun. So let's dive into Portal 1 and Portal 2. I don't think it's any real stretch to say that the Portal franchise has made an enormous impact on pop culture. It's not just the gaming community that love this franchise, because people everywhere have been quoting Portal for a very long time. It is inescapable if you've been to a convention or just hang around on social media. There are people who have never even picked up a game before who've come up to me and said, "Hey dude, the cake is a lie." It's a phenomenon far beyond anything I've seen in gaming, because while my wonderful mom doesn't know anything about video games and gets confused when I talk about Kingdom Hearts, I'm willing to bet she'd recognize a companion cube if she saw one. She wouldn't know what it is, but she'd recognize it all the same, and that's in no small part due to Portal's success. Portal was originally an independent game known as Narbacular Drop, created by college students studying at the DigiPen Institute of Technology. It was seen by Valve employees at the college's annual career fair, and they were impressed by their work enough to give them a chance to present their concept to Gabe Newell, who immediately hired them to complete the game. Narbacular Drop took 2 years and 4 months to complete, the majority of which was focused on gameplay structure and making the game fun to play. After taking on some changes over the years, including a narrative being created around the test chambers that would tie the game to Half-Life, Narbacular Drop was released in 2007 on Windows, now under the name of Portal. However, it was also bundled in a combo pack on the PlayStation 3 called the Orange Box, along with Team Fortress 2, Half-Life 2, and Half-Life 2 Episodes 1 and 2. Yeah, Valve really doesn't like the number 3. I mean, yeah, math is hard, but I don't get it. In any case, I'd heard about the Orange Box by reading Game Informer back in the day, and word-of-mouth buzz about Portal was raving about the game. I ended up buying the Orange Box just for this one game, since I had no interest in Team Fortress 2 and I never even played Half-Life 1. I was a fan of Zero Punctuation at the time, and they adored Portal, so that was what I was really hyped for. I played through the game and loved it immensely, but never really got around to completing the game until now. I saw Portal 2 on my shelf this year and said to myself, I should really finish that game one of these days, so I decided to pop in Portal for a refresher course. The results actually surprised me because, while I do still love Portal, there are some major issues I began to notice while playing through the game. Portal is a very minimalist experience from the beginning, focusing mainly on gameplay and atmosphere with only small story bits sprinkled in. Aperture Science is a testing facility run by a robot AI known as GLaDOS, who for the most part is a voice that guides you through the facility, designed to serve as a tutorial for new players and also a source of humor throughout the game. However, as you continue through the game, GLaDOS becomes the antagonist, who is clearly growing more insane as time passes. The key strength that I find is the atmosphere here, which is very stark and devoid of sound. Most of the soundtrack consists of ambient noise that feels haunting and alien in this testing environment. You often hear the buzzing of broken lights and malfunctioning test chambers that makes you feel uneasy until the final chambers, where GLaDOS goes full crazy mode and tries to kill you. The atmosphere and the deadpan delivery of GLaDOS's lines all build up to that finale and the crazy escape attempt in the second half of the game. The other key strength of Portal is the gameplay itself, which was clearly its focus. At its core, it is a puzzle platformer, handing you a gun that can make portals on most surfaces and asking you to solve test chambers in order to proceed through the game. For example, you can place a portal on the wall and on top of a high ledge to quickly grab an out-of-reach object. There are 19 test chambers in all, and it's up to you to solve the puzzles and make it through alive and well. The puzzles themselves are super well designed and do a great job of making you think outside the box, especially once you get the ability to place two portals and have to figure out how best to proceed. The game does some incredible things with weight and momentum as you use portals to fly across a room, to grab a companion cube from a high ledge, or to send orbs of energy to trigger a switch. It keeps gradually adding in new mechanics with each test chamber, but never so much that it becomes overwhelming. It remains fun throughout, especially when you break away from the path and decide to make infinite fall portal tunnels or infinite right turns just because. Playing around with portals is always a delight, and I never find myself frustrated by the mechanics of the game. However, I do find there are problems with the game that have not aged well and were nagging at the back of my mind as I played it once more. The first major issue is one of cultural osmosis. At this point, everyone knows the jokes in the game, to the point that nothing is really a surprise. It wasn't quite at that point during my initial playthrough of the game, and I found so much of it a delight, but now I know every line in the game by heart. I've had GLaDOS's lines repeated to me on message boards for years. Even though it's been a very long time since my first playthrough, I knew these jokes before they were ever spoken. Now, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, because I still found the game entertaining and funny, but I swear, "the cake is a lie" has been repeated to me so much by now that I never want to hear it again. This also ruins a large part of the psychological aspect to the game. The beginning is very straightforward, but the latter half of the game shows GLaDOS slowly malfunctioning and breaking down into something far more sinister until she tries to kill you, and that experience can only be delivered once. If you know it's coming, there's not enough impact when she says, "First you will be baked, then there will be cake." By now, most people know GLaDOS is evil and wants you dead by the end of the game, so I do feel much of that impact is lost because of how big the game became. Its status as a pop culture icon became a double-edged sword, and I don't feel the story has the same impact after all these years. My other main complaint involves the pacing of the game. The gameplay is still super fun after all these years, but it has a very weird pace. While there are 19 test chambers in the game, I managed to complete the first 15 in 45 minutes, while the final 4 test chambers took 2 hours to complete, and the escape at the end was an hour altogether. A large part of the problem is that most of the first 15 chambers are still tutorials on game mechanics and can be completed super quick if you know what you're doing. While you get the first portal gun early on in the game, you don't get the second portal gun until test chamber 11. A large portion just exists to train you on the mechanics of the game, and while it is a nice gradual slope at first, they then take off the training wheels and just dump you into harder content with no warning. It's a huge difficulty spike, especially when chambers get 3 times as long as beginning test chambers in a very short time. You can manually save to alleviate a portion of this problem, but early test chambers are so short, I would often forget I could do this since the game autosaves after each test chamber. I personally think the game could have benefited from several medium-length chambers in the middle of the game to help ease this difficulty spike. The escape itself is really damn crazy, but it's probably the best portion of the game, as you're taken out of the test chambers and get to see the tunnels and catwalks behind the scenes. It can be a bit difficult to figure out where to go at times, but this portion is always tense and leads to a wonderful final boss fight against GLaDOS herself. Altogether, Portal took me around 4 hours to complete, which is a great length for an independent game, but not perfect. I know people say this length is just right, as it ends before it has any chance to overstay its welcome, which is true, but it also could have benefited from another hour of test chambers, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, there is plenty of gameplay to keep you occupied for those 4 hours, and I've never been one to think that short game length is a bad thing, but an additional hour would help balance out the huge difficulty spike and pacing issues in the latter half of the game. Slowly ease players into the second half, then things can get crazy. Portal is often cited as a perfect video game and one of the best games of all time, but I'm sorry, I just don't agree with that assessment. Portal was an experiment from a brand new team of developers who were hired just out of college. At the time, this was something very new and fresh, and I can understand why it was so hyped and entered the popular consciousness, but now the rough edges are starting to show. The gameplay is incredibly easy to pick up and play, but it takes a while for the puzzles to really get going. The portal mechanic is wonderful, but the pacing means it takes too long to get the full range of the portal gun, and then you hit a brick wall and have to make it through challenges 3 times the length of anything you've dealt with before. The humor and writing is quite hilarious, but at this point in time, every line in the game has been mentioned and spoiled on social media. The atmosphere is phenomenal, and so is GLaDOS, but the major twist has already been spoiled. I adore this game, and I love how it advanced gaming mechanics for future games, but when playing the game again this January, I was so torn on how I felt about it. It's a really good game, but playing it all in one sitting really brought the problems to light. Portal is a great game, but it's not perfect, and it's not the greatest game ever made. However, it is a worthy addition to any game collection. In any event, Portal is a game I revisit every now and again because it is a very calming experience. Aside from replaying the game with developer commentaries, which is something I've only done recently, there's nothing to really complete in the game, so it's just a nice break in between larger games. I have heard about Portal Prelude, an unofficial mod for the first game, and I do intend to cover that in the future, along with some other mods, when I revisit the PC versions of both games, but for now, completing Portal is a simple and fun task for me. For the longest time though, the biggest question every Portal fan was asking was, alright, that was amazing, how do you top that? In 2011, 4 years after the release of the first game, we finally got an answer to that question when Portal 2 was released for PS3, Xbox 360, and Steam. Portal 2 immediately garnered immense fanfare among the gaming community at the time, but I have a bit of a sordid history with the game. I was so hyped to play Portal 2, and I had read every single article about the game just to prepare myself for it. I picked up the game on release day and got through the first 2 chapters, loving it immensely. However, then I remembered the major addition that they brought to the table with this game: co-op test chambers. I attribute this pivot towards co-op mostly to the breakout success of Left 4 Dead, a 4-player co-op survival horror experience. I liked Left 4 Dead a decent amount, but never really got sucked into the game like most of my friends. A lot of it had to do with the fact that you needed 4 people in order to play, and while there was lore, there didn't seem to be much story involved in the game. According to some people, Left 4 Dead is an action movie in the Portal and Half-Life universe, but it doesn't really connect to the franchises at all, so I wasn't really interested in any aspect of the game. However, when it was announced that co-op would be an addition to Portal 2, I was uncertain. There was a single-player campaign here for sure, and that would tide me over, but there were also plenty of co-op trophies, and that had me worried. I had only recently started hunting trophies in games at this time, but I had never done co-op trophies before, and I didn't have a microphone or a gaming headset to communicate with other players. This was the early days of gaming for me, so all I had was a trophy guide and good intentions and prayers that the person would understand what I was trying to do. I was very new to this, having only completed a handful of games fully before this point, and it didn't quite go as planned, since the PlayStation 3 is not the easiest way to communicate with other players when it comes to typing. With determination, some random online players and I managed to get the online trophies done and complete the 5 co-op courses, but it took far longer than I expected, and I was exhausted by the end of it. I was convinced I'd never get the other co-op trophies simply because it was difficult to communicate my intentions without a mic, so I put the game back on my shelf for a while and forgot about it. I was only planning to wait a year or two before jumping back into the game, but something else happened shortly afterwards. When I was in my senior year of college, several of my video games were stolen right out of the cases. I went looking for a game to find the case empty, and several other cases were the same way. To this day, I'm not entirely sure who it was, though I suspect it was my former cameraman who borrowed manga from me and never returned them. Either way, someone took around 10 or so of my games out of the cases and either sold them or added them to their own gaming library, which irks me because you gotta give your games a proper case. This was really rough for me because plenty of these games were ones I either loved dearly or was planning to play very soon. It took me a while to take stock of all the games that were stolen and buy them all back, but by that point, I was angry at the whole situation, and seeing Portal 2 in my collection just served as a reminder of what that person did. So I waited a few more years for my anger to die down. I was initially planning on completing the game in 2019, but then I found out that the co-op servers had been shut down for the game. Sure, I had the online trophies, but I would have to use local co-op to get this done, and I didn't have anyone to do it with me. I later discovered that all the co-op trophies that weren't online related could be done solo with 2 controllers, but that was a massive undertaking that I was not ready for. At least not until this year, when I sat down and conquered both the single-player campaign and the co-op. 2 controllers, 1 Zenith, no outside help. And you know what? I had an absolute blast. Portal 2 is one of the greatest video games ever made. It is certainly not perfect, but it is a game that I can find very few faults in, and one I will remember for a very long time. For all the gaming hype out there, I often get worried that I will never find a game that has the same impact on me as Okami, or Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy IX, or Virtue's Last Reward. These games are not perfect, but they left an impact on me that I'm still feeling today, where I adore them and they gripped me from start to finish. When I finally sat down and just played through Portal 2 without thinking about trophies or anything else, I couldn't put it down. This game was simply addicting, and I think it has everything to do with the change in presentation. Portal 1 was a psychological experience that relied on the player not realizing GLaDOS was evil until it was too late. It was phenomenal the first time through, but it doesn't work a second time. Where do you go from there? You take the Alien's approach. By the end of Alien, you knew what the creature was capable of, so instead of horror, they opted for an action film. The same is true of Portal 2. They decided to play up the horror of GLaDOS from the very beginning of the game and crafted a compelling story around trying to escape from the facility once more. However, instead of focusing on GLaDOS immediately, you are first introduced to an AI core known as Wheatley, who is placed in charge of the facility after GLaDOS was destroyed. Wheatley, voiced by Stephen Merchant, is an absolute delight and makes a large part of this game what it is. For those unaware, Merchant is a comedian famous for creating and starring in the British version of The Office. He also played Caliban in Logan and was responsible for many other British comedies of the past decade. For a large portion of the game, Merchant takes the general idea of what's going on and ad-libs in lines in order to suit the situation, and I honestly could not stop laughing through a large portion of it.
Most test subjects do experience some cognitive deterioration after a few months in suspension. Now, you've been under for quite a lot longer, and it's not out of the question that you might have a very minor case of serious brain damage. But don't be alarmed, all right? Although if you do feel alarmed, try to hold on to that feeling, because that is the proper reaction to being told that you've got brain damage.
He's essentially a bumbling idiot, but he endears himself to you through his dialogue. He definitely means well, and he's earnest in his delivery, but he always lets slip something stupid, and the way he delivers his lines is just perfect. I never got tired of hearing him speak, and it's just such a stark contrast to the robotically sinister delivery of GLaDOS in the first game. Wheatley serves as your guide through the first chapter of the game as you make your way through Aperture Science and try to find a portal gun once again. The facility is crumbling down around you, and it's exceedingly clear that it hasn't been in operation in years. Shell has been in suspended sleep for a very long time, and now it's time to finally escape. It seems like this will be a straightforward experience until you come across the corpse of GLaDOS and accidentally resurrect her by turning on a whole bunch of switches at once. Suddenly, there's an incredibly new dynamic put into play as GLaDOS takes over and forces you to do some more tests before eventually trying to kill you once more. It appears as if we've been transported back to the first game's plot, but at the last minute, Wheatley rescues you and you begin another escape attempt through different sectors of the facility. When making the game, project manager Eric Johnson said that trying to find a way to re-surprise players was a terrifying prospect, but somehow they managed to pull it off. Each chapter of Portal 2 is completely different and unpredictable, and that is a big thing. The game is split into 9 chapters, and each chapter offers something new and different. The first chapter works as a tutorial as you get a portal gun and learn the basics. Then, in chapter 2, you're put into random testing chambers that GLaDOS rebuilds around you. These chambers offer just the right amount of challenge without being overly long, and then, just as you're getting used to the status quo, the game gives you an escape attempt and you have to shift focus to take down GLaDOS. And that's only chapter 3. This game is constantly changing up the action and never feels stale or repetitive. It also fixes all of the pacing issues I had with the first game. I never felt as if chapters were dragging or too short, and the game autosaves every few segments, which is a huge bonus. There's no need for manual saving because the game saves your progress all the time, but if you do want to manually save, you can do so at any time to return to a previous segment for an Easter egg you might have missed. It's brilliantly handled, and I just love how they weave the story and gameplay into one cohesive whole. A large part of the story is focusing on delving into these characters and what makes them tick. And dear God, I love them. Wheatley is fascinating in how dumb he is, but yet how clever he can be at times, and I love his dialogue. GLaDOS has retained her memories from before she was killed, thanks to her black box saving the last 2 minutes of her life, so she's been driven even further insane by the experience and wants you dead. The difference here, though, is how snarky she is now. She isn't trying to hide her malfunctions anymore. She straight up hates you and feeds you passive-aggressive lines about you being an orphan or about your weight. It's such a different dynamic from before, but it works so damn well because you go back and forth between these two characters and see what makes them tick. I honestly started to feel sorry for GLaDOS the more I learned about her, and the more I realized she was just doing her job and corrupted by the machinery that houses her. Then there's Cave Johnson, the founder of Aperture Science, voiced by J.K. Simmons, and he is an absolute delight. Everything he says is an instant quote, but unlike the first game, where the quotes lose a lot of their impact if you hear them all beforehand, I found myself laughing at them more in context. For example, Cave's exploding lemons line. I've heard this quote many times before, but now that I know the context behind the quote, I'm laughing even more at the entire situation. It's just a wonderful combination of fantastic writing, superb voice acting, and masterful storytelling. Speaking of which, the characters aren't the only important aspect improved for this sequel. As you continue through this game and see these characters interact with each other, you begin to learn a lot more about Aperture Science and how things fell apart. There's a segment later on in the game where you head down into the old test chambers and hear audio logs from Cave Johnson that completely explain his crazy work ethic. Not only is it hilarious to hear about how he experimented on human test subjects and turned their blood into gasoline, but you also hear how he died, how GLaDOS was created, and why Aperture Science ended up the way it did. It's a wonderful segment of lore, but it also retroactively adds so much more to the original Portal as we get context for certain events that happened in the first game. I'm not going to say any more than this until the eventual should you complete this on both games, because the twists and turns in the solo campaign deserve to be experienced with fresh eyes. There are some brilliant twists and turns, and it all builds up to another fantastic end boss and an ending that has me questioning how this franchise will continue. Then again, as we established, Valve can't count to 3, and I don't think we will ever see a Portal 3 in our lifetime. Gabe Newell himself stated that Portal 2 was the best game they've ever done, and it would be really hard to top this experience if they ever wanted to try. As for the gameplay, it is the same fantastic portal hopping gameplay from before, with far more clever test chambers, but there are several additions and changes that help it out a ton. First of all, no longer are you going through the test chambers in numerical order, and that actually is a big help in my opinion. No longer am I focusing on which test chamber I'm in and thinking it took far too short a time to get there. Instead, I just focus on the test chambers themselves. They tend to be grouped in threes, where you do a few in order that are interesting to solve, then you move on to 3 completely different test chambers that focus on something else. This improves the pacing as well, since it's no longer a fully linear experience, but just a series of test chambers that each do something new and different. Another change is that you go through regular test chambers in a controlled environment, and then you go outside the test chambers to use the new mechanics in the facility outside. It rewards you for thinking outside the box, but only once you're used to the mechanic itself, and that is a great change. In addition to the pacing changes, there have been several new mechanics introduced to spice up the gameplay. There are excursion funnels, which are beams that take you from one end of the room to the other, and can be used in conjunction with portals to be moved all around the room. There are bridges made of light that function the same way, but can also be used as a shield against turrets as well. There are cubes that can redirect lasers and function much better than the orbs in Portal 1, and just streamline the process much more, and aerial faith plates that launch you around the test chambers. You might think that's overkill, but there's also 3 different types of gel that aid in mobility. Propulsion gel allows you to cross rooms more quickly, repulsion gel lets you bounce and jump higher, and conversion gel allows you to place a portal on any surface that has conversion gel on it. There is a lot added to this game, but it's never overwhelming. Each mechanic is introduced gradually, and even when you have to use every new mechanic in a test chamber, they do a wonderful job of giving you direction on what to do. The only major complaint I have is that there are portions of the game, specifically in Chapter 6 and 7, where it's exceedingly confusing where you're supposed to go. This is the large segment where, for the most part, you're outside the facility, and just like in the Portal 1 escape sequence, there are several points I had to look up where to go, because you're supposed to somehow figure out to place a portal very high up or very far in the background, and it's not always clear which portal surface is the way forward. I feel that these sequences could have given you a clearer indication of where to go, or just had less obtuse level design, because I would have figured it out eventually, but it would have taken a lot longer without some YouTube videos. The test chambers themselves are fantastically well designed, but once you head to the next chamber, these problems keep popping up. Granted, this is only a problem in the old facility in Chapter 6 and 7, but they did present a large problem for me. I managed to get through most of the game without a guide, but these portions are just really hard to figure out. Finally, we have to discuss the co-op, which is surprisingly very good. As stated before, the PS3 online servers were shut down a while ago, so I was unable to play with anyone online. My new roommate Cody helped me out with the final 2 chambers of Course 5, but for the most part, I did this completely by myself. Thankfully, there isn't much that has to be done under time limit, so it's entirely possible to head through every course switching controllers as you go. The co-op is incredibly well designed, with each course and chamber taking the principles of single player and just throwing 2 more portals into the mix. The types of puzzles don't get any harder, but they do require teamwork and clever thinking. That's why it is very possible solo, because if you can figure out the solution, you can easily direct where each player is supposed to go. The only trouble chambers for me were the final 2 in Course 4, which can be mostly skipped due to a glitch, which was amazing, even though it took several hours to figure out how to do this glitch, but it was pretty damn cool to pull off. And the final 2 in Course 5, which I had Cody help me with. Altogether, I highly enjoyed co-op, but I wish I had a full experience with a mic and another player. When I return to the PC versions of Portal and Portal 2, I do intend to discuss the co-op further, along with the numerous mods, because I don't feel I've ever truly had the intended co-op experience. Still, this is incredibly fun, even with the challenge of doing it solo. Portal 2 is without question one of my favorite games of all time. While it does have its share of issues, such as the confusion and vagueness in Chapter 6 and 7, and the PS3 servers being shut down for co-op, these don't detract from the overall experience. Portal 2 just takes what worked in the first game, removes or fixes what didn't, for the most part, and just adds more. More story, more character, more witty dialogue, more gameplay mechanics that add immense replay value, more emotion, more humor, and overall, more fun. The co-op is probably the best I've ever experienced playing video games, even if I didn't get to experience it properly. I highly encourage you to play Portal 2. It is one of my top video games of all time, and even 10 years after my initial playthrough, I was far more blown away by it than I ever thought possible. Portal 1 is still worth your time, and you should play it before diving into the sequel, but Portal 2 is a revelation. For once, it is a game worthy of all the hype it received. People definitely talk about the first game far more than Portal 2, but in general, everyone I have ever interacted with has said that Portal 2 is the better game in just about every aspect. It isn't quite as psychological, and thankfully the major twists in Portal 2 have avoided being spoiled, but I do agree that it's hard to top the atmosphere and psychological breakdown at the end of Portal 1. It's just a shame you could only experience that once, and most people have been spoiled on what happens already. With all that being said, both of these games deserve to be in your collection, and Portal 2 especially deserves your time. This is a case where I actually understand why they never made a Portal 3, because I'm honestly not sure how you could top this or expand upon the world of Portal any further. We may never have a sequel or an official prequel, but there are dozens of mods to discuss in the future, and overall, this Midnight Combo Pack was worth all the sleepless nights. I give this combo pack the Midnight stamp of approval. Please give these games a try. You will not be disappointed. In any event, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, saying that not all games are worth staying up past midnight, but many of them are. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you like what you see, don't forget to hit that bell to get every notification and help me feed the bunnies. And as this is a new and experimental video series, don't forget to leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Anything is appreciated, and just have a good one, everybody. Love you.